She was humiliated for not having the right last name. He, a millionaire who believed that love came after status. When he discovered that she could not get pregnant, he left her for another woman, rich, perfect, and infertile. 10 years later, the truth comes out. Júlia rebuilt her life on her own, chose to be a mother on her own terms, and became a national reference in family law. Now, about to give birth to 2 daughters, she meets again the man who once treated her as invisible. But she is no longer the same. Get ready for a moving, powerful, and twisty story where self-love overcomes prejudice and authenticity destroys appearances. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments which city or country you are watching from. The morning light streamed through the impeccable windows of the penthouse on the top of Avenida Europa, giving a golden tint to the cold, luxurious furniture of an apartment that looked more like a showroom than a home. Júlia Vasquez stood in front of the huge panoramic window where São Paulo stretched out as far as the eye could see, breathing deeply as if trying to fill a bottomless void. She was 36 years old, with a brilliant resume as a professor of constitutional law at the most prestigious university in the country, a house that looked like a magazine cover, and a newly acquired surname that opened doors. But none of that filled the silence between the rooms. None of that erased the absence that was eating away at her insides. She was not yet a mother. She ran her hand through her hair, which was tied in a disciplined bun, turning slowly when she heard the sound of the door opening. It was always like this. Rafael Lacerda arrived as if he owned time. His suit was neat, his Italian leather briefcase, and that air of someone who was already waiting for the world on his knees. One of the most sought-after corporate lawyers in Latin America, Rafael was also her husband, at least on paper. Rafael, she began, gathering her courage, I think it's time we saw a specialist. We've been trying naturally for almost 4 years now. Maybe we should both get tested. He sighed without even looking at her. There you go again with that talk. This isn't just talk, Rafael. This is our chance. I don't want to give up on being a mother without really trying. He finally looked at her. His gaze was like glass, beautiful but sharp. The Lacerdas never had this kind of problem. My father had 5 children. My grandfather 7. If there's something wrong, Júlia, it's not on my side. Her stomach sank. His words were arrows to her chest, cold, sharp, and painfully predictable. He picked up a crystal glass, poured the whiskey as if rehearsing perfection, and took a sip without hesitation. You want a child, Júlia? Great. But not at the expense of my image. I'm not going to be treated like a patient at a fertility clinic just because you insist on playing the victim. This isn't about image, she replied, her voice breaking. It's about courage, about being honest with each other. Do you want to be honest? He leaned closer, his voice still tight, but each word was a punch. Let's be honest then. You still cling to that teaching career as if it were relevant. You keep refusing my business dinners, my trips, my social circles. You're always embarrassing me with your simple ways. And the worst part, you can't do the bare minimum. Produce an heir. She stood still. This was no longer frustration. It was raw cruelty, and it wasn't the first time. Rafael, she said, trying to maintain her dignity, I am your wife, not an employee of your company. I deserve respect. He laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off the cold walls of the apartment. Respect is earned, Júlia. You were an interesting project when we met. That girl from the North Zone who got a scholarship to the Federal University, full of sparkle in her eyes. But you stopped. You stopped in time, in ambition, in appearance. And now you ask me to sit next to you in a waiting room and accept that the problem could be mine? No, thank you. She didn't answer. She just felt something snap, like a thin thread holding together what was left of the marriage. The next day, Júlia was sitting in the delicately decorated office of Dr. Renata Braga, one of the most renowned fertility specialists in the capital. Alone. Raphael didn't even return her messages. "All your tests are excellent, Júlia," the doctor said, smiling kindly. "Your body is ready. The picture is positive." The lump in Júlia's throat dissolved into silent tears. "So, there's nothing wrong with me?" "Absolutely nothing," confirmed Renata. "But Júlia, in order for us to move forward with any treatment, it is essential that we evaluate the couple, including male factors." "He doesn't want to," she murmured. "He says it's an insult to his manhood." Renata nodded, as if she had heard it before. "Unfortunately, it's more common than it should be, but we can't force anyone. What we can do is help you think of other paths, and I can introduce you to an excellent clinic with a very high success rate if you decide to go it alone." Alone. The word seemed like an abyss, but for the first time in years, Júlia felt that perhaps it was also a rebirth. Later that day, sitting across from her younger sister, Natalia, in a modest coffee shop in the neighborhood where they grew up, Júlia told her everything. About the exams, about Raphael, about the divorce papers she had finally had the courage to sign. "He won't accept losing control," Natalia said. "But you know what? Screw it. You deserve more, much more." "I need to find my place in the world again," Júlia said, her voice shaking, "and I need to do it for myself, not as someone's ex-wife." Natalia smiled. "Then start here. Sign the papers. And if you want, tomorrow we can start looking for an apartment, small, but yours." That night, Júlia took her college name tag, Professor Júlia Vasquez, and held it tight. She would once again be the master of her story. Júlia entered the law firm's meeting room with firm steps and sharp eyes. Nothing about this woman reminded her of the insecure young woman who, years ago, accompanied Raphael to events where she was looked up and down by women who said they admired her courage in teaching instead of running a foundation or a family business. Now, she had a cause, and more importantly, she had herself back. On the other side of the table, Camila Matos, a renowned and relentless lawyer in high-profile separation cases, analyzed the documents sent by Raphael. "These terms are a joke," she said, pushing the papers aside dismissively. "He wants to push you out with as little as possible, thinking you'll accept just to get out of the process." "He underestimates me," Júlia replied, taking a check from her purse. "And that ends now. I want you to file everything today. And this is the advance. My money, not his." Camilla raised her eyebrows. "This changes everything, Júlia. Are you ready to fight? I don't want to destroy anyone. I just won't be erased from my own story anymore." Hours later, as she left the registry office where she officially signed the divorce petition, Júlia breathed the city air as if it were the first time. Free. Still wounded, yes, but alive. The new apartment was small, on the second floor of a building with no elevator in Perdizes. The walls were still bare, and the echo of her footsteps sounded like a whisper of a new beginning. She left behind Raphael's expensive furniture, the Italian silverware she never used, the soulless paintings. Now, every item that entered there would have a purpose. It would have affection. That same night, sitting on the floor with her sister, eating pizza straight from the box, Júlia laughed. For real. She laughed out of nervousness, out of relief, out of freedom. "Remember when we lived in that little extension that flooded when it rained?" Natalia asked, laughing. "I remember. And I also remember promising myself that I would have a home one day, a real one. I'm getting there." The next day, Júlia returned to the clinic recommended by Dr. Renata. There she met Dr. Hugo Bastos, a specialist in assisted reproduction. A calm man with a calm voice and dark eyes that listened more than they judged. "You're not alone, Júlia," he said, after reviewing her scans. "Today, thousands of women are choosing to start families on their own terms, and you have an excellent chance." "I want to begin," she replied, with a conviction that surprised even herself. Choosing a donor wasn't easy. She spent nights reading profiles. She avoided the most perfect ones, which seemed like marketing sheets. She stopped at one that caught her attention for something that couldn't be explained in words. In the biography field, he had written, "Family is the sum of the choices we make out of love, and every child deserves to be welcomed with truth and affection." That was it. During the same period, a new name began to cross Júlia's path frequently. Dr. Caio Montalvão. A lawyer specializing in reproductive law, he was recommended by the clinic to help her ensure legal security during the insemination process and, in the future, regarding the baby's custody and rights. His office was in a restored old house, where photos of clients with their children decorated the walls between shelves of legal books. During the first consultation, he listened to her with rare attention. "You are rewriting your own destiny, Júlia. Don't feel guilty about it." She smiled, surprised by the easy connection between them. Something about the way he spoke, the way he held her gaze, made her feel seen, really seen. With his support and the release of the tests, the procedure was scheduled. The insemination would be performed the following week. And as the date approached, Júlia reorganized the apartment, her life and her soul. One afternoon, as she was adjusting the crib she had just assembled by herself, she felt an unexpected pang of emotion. Not fear, but hope. The night before the procedure, she spent the night with Natalia, who brought her soup, a blanket and words of encouragement. "You're going to be the best mother this world has ever seen, Ju. What if it doesn't work out?" she asked, her tears hidden. "You try again. But if you succeed, this child will have the luck of being raised by the bravest woman I know." The insemination was quick, silent, but full of meaning. Dr. Hugo was gentle and meticulous. At the end, Júlia lay down for a few minutes, her eyes closed, her hands on her belly. Alone in her body, but accompanied by a multitude of dreams. There were days of waiting, of long silences, of resisting the temptation to take the test before the time. Natalia called every day. Caio sent messages with phrases that always brought a smile to her face. The university adjusted her workload, and so Júlia filled the gaps with something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Until one morning, while she was brushing her teeth, a second pink line appeared on the test strip on the sink. She sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried. For the life that was beginning. For the courage she had, for the woman she had become again. Minutes later, with a trembling voice, he called Natalia. "Guess who's going to be an aunt?" Her sister's scream echoed through the phone. But what Júlia didn't know was that another sound was echoing, silent and unexpected, from the other side of the city. On the other side of the city, in an office as cold and spotless as its owner, Rafael Lacerda watched the rain run down the window. It was late afternoon, but he hadn't even noticed the time passing. His days were becoming more and more the same. Spreadsheets, meetings, smiles that didn't reach his eyes. The divorce from Júlia, which he believed to be a relief, had become an invisible and uncomfortable wound. He married again, of course, to Cynthia Gouveia, the daughter of a banker with a surname and pedigree. The kind of woman who spoke 5 languages, knew how to choose the right wine, and had a list of contacts worth more than an MBA. But she didn't laugh with her body, she didn't discuss ideas with a twinkle in her eye. And she didn't make him feel whole, just adequate. In the first few months, Cynthia and Rafael were seen as a showcase couple. They traveled, they attended events, they smiled, rehearsed in the society pages. But at home, silence was a constant visitor. And when the fertility tests started to show that something wasn't right, Rafael found himself surrounded by mirrors that he had avoided for years. It was in the office of an elite clinic that he heard the diagnosis: critical sperm count, low mobility, minimal chances of natural conception. The doctor spoke in a neutral, professional voice, but each word was like shards of glass in her throat. "That's not possible," he said, astonished. "The Lacidus have always been fertile." "Fertility is not a guaranteed hereditary legacy, Mr. Lassiter. Medicine has shown that several factors, including environmental and emotional ones, have a significant influence." That night, the silence at home was thicker than usual. Cynthia, always so practical, discreetly suggested the anonymous donor option, as if they were choosing a health plan. "It's just biology, Raphael," she said. "The important thing is the surname, the continuity. The rest, no one needs to know." But Raphael couldn't swallow it. It was like hearing a dark echo of himself years ago, when he had used almost the same words to hurt Júlia. The next morning, impulsively, he typed her name into Google. And there, among legal articles and mentions at academic conferences, he found a recent video of a lecture. Professor Júlia Vasquez, Humanizing Family Law, When Precedents See People. Her image filled the screen. Steady, serene, with a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen since the days when she still believed in him. And then he saw it. The slight curve beneath her dress, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, the restrained smile of someone carrying a precious secret. She was pregnant. Raphael paused the video. He zoomed in on the image. He saw her eyes, now filled with a peace he had never been able to offer. And the question arose like a thunderclap in the center of his chest. Was she expecting a child? But how? At the same time, Beatrice Mello, an old friend of the elite and an expert in spreading rumors like someone distributing petals, sent a message. "Honey, did you hear the news about Júlia? They say she chose a donor, pregnant with twins, can you believe it? A real soap opera. And you? When is the Lacerda Gouveia heir coming?" He didn't answer. He just turned off his phone and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man in the mirror was no longer a winner. He was someone who had spent his life trying to fill the void with status, without realizing that what mattered most had been left behind. Laughing at herself in a classroom, grading tests with her hair tied up in a mess, calling on him to be better. That night, Júlia was getting ready to sleep when her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Caio. "I received the final documentation from the clinic. Everything is in order. Whenever you want, we can legally register the maternity certificate. It will all be done in due time." She smiled. At nearly 12 weeks pregnant, the physical changes were subtle, but the internal transformation was monumental. Later, when he closed his eyes, he felt something new. A slight movement in his belly, like a feather dancing on the water. Life was there, and there was no more room for regrets. The next morning, while she was drinking coffee on the balcony of her new apartment, the sun illuminated the still open boxes, the plants trying to grow in their makeshift pots, and the papers for her next class. Júlia was far from the luxury that Raphael offered. But everything there was hers, and for the first time, she didn't have to prove it to anyone. His cell phone vibrated. It was an unidentified caller. She answered. "Júlia, it's me, Raphael." The name came out like warm poison. She said nothing. "I saw the video of your lecture, and I heard about the pregnancy." Silence. "I just wanted to talk. Please." She took a deep breath. Her heartbeat quickened. Not from fear, but from a strength she now knew she had. "If you want to talk, Raphael, come as a man, not as the lawyer nor as the heir, because here you no longer have any power." And then she hung up. The silence after hanging up the call was absolute, as if time had stopped for a second to let each word reverberate inside Júlia. She stood there with her cell phone in her hand, her eyes fixed on the city that was slowly waking up. The conversation hadn't been long, but it had opened a rift, and she knew she needed to decide how she wanted to deal with the past that, no matter how much she tried to bury it, still insisted on knocking on the door. Hours later at university, Júlia tried to concentrate on reviewing articles submitted by students. But Raphael's words echoed like a shadow trying to stretch across the achievements she had built. She closed her laptop. She stood up, and impulsively, she picked up her cell phone. "Caio, can you have lunch with me today?" "Sure," he replied without hesitation. "Okay. I need to talk to someone who understands more than paragraphs and case law." They met in a discreet restaurant frequented by local teachers and doctors. Caio was already waiting for her, as always with a calm look and a sincere smile. When she arrived, he stood up and pulled out a chair. "I don't want to mix things up, Caio, but I need to be honest," she said after the first sip of juice. "Raphael called me." "That explains the tone of your voice." He adjusted his glasses. "Do you want to talk about it?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. She told him everything. The phone call, the request to talk, the voice that seemed to have aged, the attempt to reappear as if years of indifference and arrogance could be undone with a please. "And what do you feel?" Caio asked. "Anger, of course, but also pity, and maybe a little bit of compassion." She looked out the window. "I loved him, Caio, and I was destroyed by that love. But it was also thanks to that I got to where I am. I rebuilt myself from the ashes he left. I don't want him to come back and try to rewrite my story, not as an apology, not as redemption." "Then don't let it," Caio said firmly. "You don't owe him anything, Júlia. Neither conversation nor understanding. But if you feel that you need this meeting to turn the page once and for all, do it. For you, not for him." She took a deep breath and nodded. "Maybe I do, but not alone." The following week, an unexpected invitation came from the university. Júlia had been selected to represent Brazil at the International Conference on Family Law in Lisbon. Her talk on humane methods for resolving family conflicts had attracted attention abroad. It was a huge opportunity, but it also came with challenges. She would be 24 weeks pregnant at the time of the trip. When he shared the news with Caio, he smiled with pride. "That's amazing and fair. You deserve this stage. And don't worry, I'm already taking care of the legal part so that you travel with everything covered, including medical assistance there." "You take care of everything," she said, her smile more intimate than she intended. "Because I want to see you fly, Júlia. I always have." The silence between them said more than any sentence. That same night, Rafael Lacerda stared at the computer screen without seeing. Cynthia was no longer at home. The excuse was that she was traveling for work. The truth, she had moved into her parents' apartment. "This marriage has become an image problem," she had said, "and image is the one thing I can't afford to lose." Rafael didn't argue. For the first time in his life, he didn't have the strength to fight for something that was never real. Alone in the apartment decorated like a magazine cover, he opened the video of Júlia's lecture again and watched it, this time until the end. Her words were not just technical, they were true. They were about pain, forgiveness, and starting over. It was about her. It was what he had never been able to see. Meanwhile, Júlia organized the final details of the trip with the help of Natalia, who had become her greatest ally and unofficial godmother to the future pair of babies. "You're going to shine, sister," she said, hugging her sister in front of the mirror. "And you're going to show that no woman needs a family name to make history." On the morning of the trip, with her bags packed, Júlia received a new message, a saved number, Raphael. "I'll be in Lisbon for work. If you want, we can talk. Just talk." She looked at the text, then at the mirror, then at her belly, and he simply replied, "Perhaps." Lisbon seemed to breathe at a different pace. The ancient stone slopes, the terracotta roofs, and the smell of salt from the Tagus in the late afternoon enveloped Júlia like an unexpected embrace of life. It was her first international trip alone in years, but this time not as someone's companion. She was the speaker, the voice everyone was waiting to hear, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take up that space. Her belly was already clearly revealing the presence of the twins. The navy blue dress she had chosen for the main event did not hide it, and she made no effort to hide it. It was the symbol of everything she had regained: freedom, motherhood, dignity. At the hotel where the speakers were staying, the smiles were genuine. The questions were sincere. She was not judged for her past, nor for her origins, nor for coming from a country where family law still struggled to see the human behind the papers. She was heard, and that was enough. The night before his talk, Caio video called in from his living room. "How are the girls?" "Active," she replied, laughing. "They seem to like being in another time zone." "How are you?" "Scared, excited, proud, tired." She stopped, and a little apprehensive too. "Raphael arrived in town today." Caio was silent for a second. "Have you decided to meet him?" "Not yet, but I feel it is inevitable. I just want you to protect yourself, Júlia, to remember everything you've built, and that this meeting, if it happens, is for the right reason, to close doors, not reopen them." She smiled. "That's why I like having emotional advocates around." The next morning, the conference room was packed. Educators, judges, and representatives from several nations gathered to hear from the Brazilian woman who was redefining the way family law was taught in practice. Júlia took the stage with firm steps, feeling the stares, the lights, and the sweet weight of responsibility. Her talk began with technique, but evolved into something more intimate. "For a long time, I saw the law as a shield. Then I realized that it could also be a bridge. And it was when I understood this that my way of teaching changed. Because each process carries lives, hearts, dreams, and wounds. You cannot judge without first listening." The audience gave a standing ovation, and she stepped off the stage with her heart racing, not only from the emotion, but from the unexpected movement at the back of the room. Raphael was there, waiting. He was no longer wearing his designer suit. He wore a simple shirt, open at the collar. There were dark circles under his eyes. His hands were clasped behind his back, as if he were carrying the weight of something he had never said. She walked toward him with the care that pregnancy demanded, but without hesitation. "May I accompany you to the hotel garden?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes." She nodded. The afternoon wind caressed the leaves of the trees as the two walked side by side in silence. "You look beautiful, Júlia," he said, breaking the silence. "I'm alive. It's different." He smiled sadly. "I came to tell you something I should have told you years ago. I was wrong. I was wrong with every judgment, with every humiliation, with every time I made you feel inferior, and I pay for it every day." She took a deep breath. "You traded me because my origins embarrassed you, because my simplicity didn't fit into your perfect family frame. But, Raphael, I never needed your last name. I just wanted respect, partnership. And now you came for that?" He hesitated. "I came because I can't look in the mirror and pretend I'm whole. Because every time I see you bloom, I realize how blind I've been. And because..." He trailed off, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm sterile, Júlia. I always have been. And I only found out when it was too late." She looked at him, with compassion, with truth, but without anger. "I know," he said, "not because of you, but because life has shown me that there's no point in holding on to other people's guilt. What you did hurt me, Raphael, but it also freed me." He lowered his head. "May I know who the father is?" She smiled, placing her hand on her belly. "A donor, chosen with care, with love. But what matters is that these girls are mine, and they will be born surrounded by truth, and by people who love them for who they are, not for what they represent." "Does he?" The voice broke. "Does he love you?" "Love. And you don't need to say it. You're with me every day. You support me, you see me." A deep silence fell. "Thank you for listening to me," he murmured. She nodded. "Now listen to me, Raphael. Don't try to be a part of what I've built. This is mine. These lives I carry are mine. And this peace you feel now, it's not forgiveness, it's closure." He nodded, his eyes red. "Goodbye, Júlia." She smiled tenderly. "Goodbye." And she turned, feeling the wind gently lift her hair. Every step back to the hotel was an affirmation. Every breath a reminder. She was no one's shadow, she was light. And she didn't need anyone else to illuminate her. Back in the lobby, he found a notification on his cell phone. A message from Caio. "Watching your talk on the stream. I cried here. When you come back, I have an important question for you. And a ring, if you're ready." Júlia laughed to herself. And then, with her hand on her belly and tears in her eyes, she replied, "I'll be back tomorrow." And yes, the flight back to Brazil seemed lighter. Perhaps it was because of the relief of having faced old ghosts with serenity. Or perhaps because for the first time in a long time, Júlia knew that the future was on the other side of the ocean, and not behind her, in the ashes of what had been. In her suitcase, in addition to the awards and invitations to new conferences, she brought a new piece, the kind that only those who have weathered storms know. Natalia was at the airport with an improvised sign. "Welcome, most powerful speaker in the Southern Hemisphere and mother of the luckiest twins in the world." Júlia laughed, cried, and hugged her sister as if she were returning home after a silent war. That same day, at night, she went to Caio's house. He was on the porch, holding 2 mugs of tea and wearing that old sweatshirt that he swore he didn't know already had holes in it. "I thought you were going to give up on me in Lisbon," he said, smiling. "I was busy finishing one cycle," she replied, taking the mug in both hands. "And now I'm ready to start another." Caio approached, with a small but elegant ring in his hands. No grand gestures, no kneeling, just steady eyes, light breathing, and the truth written on his face. "Júlia Vasquez, you taught me more about courage than any case I've ever defended. You showed me that family is about choice, construction, and respect. And I want to build that with you, with the girls, with everything that comes. Will you marry me?" She smiled. Her eyes were watery, her hands were shaking. "I married once for appearances. Now I want to marry for truth. Yes, Caio, 1,000 times yes." The following months were spent preparing, not for a ceremony but for a double arrival. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and the medical team monitored her closely. At university, Júlia remained active, coordinating projects and advising students even while working from home. Caio took on his new role as present father-to-be with total dedication, transforming the baby's room with carefully chosen details. "This wallpaper with clouds smells like hope," he said one afternoon while painting with Natalia, and Júlia laughed, sitting in the armchair, watching the two argue about which shade of blue was the most welcoming. "Hope is when we paint without knowing what will happen," replied Júlia. "But we paint anyway." In the 36th week, the doctor suggested scheduling the birth. The girls were healthy, well-positioned, and Júlia's body was already showing signs of fatigue. The night before she was admitted was silent. She walked around the apartment, touching the furniture, the tiny folded clothes, the books, the double crib. "I'm scared, Caio," she confessed. "Me too," he replied. "But fear is just a sign that something very important is about to happen." At the hospital, everything was prepared with care. The delivery room was filled with smiles and anticipation. Natalia wouldn't let go of her sister's hand. Caio, by her side, whispered words of strength as if he knew that this was the biggest battle of their lives. And then, they came into the world. First, Helena. She shouted as if she was demanding to be heard. Strong, alive, determined. Then, Clara. She arrived silently, but with her eyes wide open, observing everything around her as if she already understood more than she should. "They're perfect," said the doctor. "They're ours," replied Júlia emotionally. The crying mixed with laughter. The cameras captured the first seconds of a new story. And in the midst of that sweet chaos, Júlia looked at Caio, who was holding Clara with firm hands and teary eyes, and knew with complete certainty she would never be alone again. The following days were a dance of diapers, cries, feedings, and small victories. The first time Helena held Caio's finger, Clara's first smile, the sleepless nights, the mornings with the smell of coffee and warm milk. "This is love, right?" asked Natalia one morning. "No," Júlia replied, smiling. "This is life. Love is just the beginning." Months had passed since Helena and Clara were born, and Júlia's life had found a new harmony, one of chaos and beauty. With each sleepless night, with each soothed cry in her arms, she felt the days fall into place. Nothing was silent anymore, but everything made sense. The house that had once been hers alone now breathed in unison with two little souls who called her mother. Caio became not only a presence, but a root. His care for the girls, the improvised lunches, the naps on the couch with the twins sleeping on his chest, everything about him was a gesture of belonging. They weren't officially married, not yet, but they lived as if they had been a family for years. "One day we'll celebrate with a party," said Júlia, laughing while washing baby bottles. "We're already celebrating, every day," he replied, kissing her forehead. At the university, Júlia's return was welcomed with enthusiasm. Her students, who had previously admired her firm teaching style, now saw something more in her, a woman who lived what she taught. Her classes had more color, more soul, and her projects began to include discussions on single parenthood, contemporary family structure, and equity in custody proceedings, all influenced by her personal experience. "You're different," said a student one afternoon. "I am whole now," Júlia replied. During an internal seminar, he presented a new module, Families Beyond Paper. The project proposed looking at the family structure with more empathy, recognizing the diversity of realities, trajectories, and choices. It was at this same seminar that he received an envelope, discreetly delivered by a secretary. The sender, Rafael Lacerda. She hesitated before opening it, but she did. Inside, a single letter, handwritten. "Júlia, it took me a long time to understand that some losses are, in fact, mirrors. Your absence showed me who I was. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I don't want to be in your life or the girls. I just wanted to say thank you for loving me when I was nothing but vanity, for standing up to me when I was arrogance, and for moving forward, showing me and the world that true love begins within us. I hope they grow up with your eyes and with your strength. Goodbye, Rafael." Júlia folded the letter delicately. There was no pain, no resentment, just the feeling that finally the cycle had closed. The following weekend, Caio took her and the girls to the park where she used to go alone, before everything happened. It was one of those days when the sky seems made of cotton and time moves more slowly. Helena took her first steps with Caio's help. Clara, more restrained, laughed while sitting on the carpet. "Remember when you told me that it all started with a cut?" Júlia asked, looking at him. "I remember. A rupture. Today, I see that it was a liberation." She approached him and held his hand. On the ring that Caius had given her, a small inscription inside. Truth, not appearance. There, in the middle of the park, with her daughters playing in the sun and the wind playing with her hair, Júlia understood that there were no more pages to turn. Everything was there, complete, ready to be lived. "Mom," Clara stammered for the first time. Júlia cried. "Did you hear that?" "I heard," said Caius, "and I want to hear it for a long time." At that moment, she thought about everything she had experienced. The abandonment, The humiliation, the reconstruction, the new beginning. And I knew. Sometimes what seems like an irreparable loss is just the world pushing us towards the path that truly belongs to us. She bent down, hugged her daughters and whispered, "I didn't need an inherited surname. I created my own legacy." And that's how she won. Without a stage, without an audience, just with love, with courage, with the truth that no one else could take from her.